They laughed at him. They took photographs on their phones and posted them online with captions about garbage and eyesores and what the neighborhood had come to. Strangers who had never spent a single night outside, not one, decided in 30 seconds that the structure Marcus Webb was building in that vacant lot was proof of failure. His failure, specifically. That was October. By January 30th, 2019, when Chicago recorded wind chills of -50 degrees Fahrenheit and the city's own warming centers were overwhelmed and failing, every person who had laughed was warm inside a building somebody else had built for them. And Marcus Webb, in his Pallet shelter in that same vacant lot, was alive. Warmer than the men on cots in the gymnasium 3 blocks away. Warmer than anyone watching from behind glass had any right to expect. What he knew, and what the city's entire emergency shelter system did not, is what this video is about. It was a Thursday in late October when Marcus first started pulling the pallets together. He had been watching the lot for 6 weeks before that. He was not sitting idle. He was watching with purpose, the way someone watches before they act. When acting wrong means dying. He noted which corner collected wind and which stayed calm. He watched where the snow from an early frost drifted and where it did not. He stood in the lot at different hours of the day and felt where the sun hit the ground longest and where it disappeared by 2 in the afternoon. He was 44 years old. He had worked construction for 11 years before a back injury and a series of events that compound the way they do when you have no margin left. He understood materials the way people understand things. They have worked with their hands for a decade. The pallets came from 3 different businesses within a 6-block radius. A furniture warehouse left them stacked by the dumpster every Tuesday and Friday. A grocery distribution center had a pile around the side that no one touched. A hardware store discarded ones with cracked boards. Marcus was not taking anyone's property. He was collecting what the city had already decided was worthless. Sound familiar? That is the central inversion of this entire story. The city of Chicago, with its budget and its protocols and its press releases, was deploying solutions that failed, and Marcus Webb, with nothing but discarded wood and 2 decades of working-class knowledge, was building something that worked. So what did he understand that the system never bothered to learn? Before we get into the exact mechanics of what Marcus built and why it performed the way it did, drop a comment right now. Have you ever built something, fixed something, or figured something out using materials everyone else had already thrown away? Because what you are about to learn about passive thermal retention is going to change how you think about warmth, shelter, and the kind of intelligence that never shows up on a resume, but saves your life when nothing else will. Tell us your story below, because what you are about to discover will change how you see the relationship between poverty and ingenuity permanently. Here is what passes for emergency cold weather shelter in America. When temperatures drop and a city scrambles, here is the inventory that gets deployed. A cot, a folding aluminum frame with a nylon surface elevated about 8 inches off a concrete gymnasium floor. A sleeping bag rated to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning it was tested to keep a person alive at freezing, not at the temperatures that actually kill people on the streets of Chicago in January. A space blanket, that miraculous crinkled silver sheet that appears in every emergency kit and reflects radiant heat brilliantly, and that does absolutely nothing about conductive heat loss when a human body is pressed against a cold surface for 8 consecutive hours. Maybe a donated coat, maybe a cup of soup, a gymnasium with industrial doors that open every 15 to 20 minutes as people cycle in and out, bleeding the interior temperature into the night air with mechanical efficiency. These are the solutions that get the budget line item, the press release photograph, the nonprofit grant, and every single year, in cities across this country, roughly 700 people die of cold exposure anyway. 700 human beings, not despite the emergency shelter system, alongside it, at the same time, in the same cities. The cots are there, the sleeping bags are there, the gymnasium is open, and people are still dying in the cold 3 blocks away. Now contrast that with what Marcus was building. No budget, no institutional support, no grant application. 11 days of labor, working alone in temperatures already dropping into the 20s at night, and a result that outperformed every piece of equipment the city had deployed. Here is where it gets worse. The people who designed those gymnasium deployments had engineering degrees, they had procurement departments, they had decades of institutional knowledge. And they never once asked the question that Marcus was answering with every pallet he stacked. Where does the heat go? If you are finding this valuable, hit the like button right now, because this is the part that should genuinely make you angry, and it is only just getting started. The villain in this story is not a person. It is never a single person. It is a system, a deeply embedded, heavily funded, thoroughly credentialed system that decided somewhere along the way that the measure of a shelter solution was whether it existed, not whether it worked. A system that optimized for liability management instead of thermal performance, that chose solutions with purchase orders over solutions with results, that treated the people sleeping outside as problems to be processed rather than engineers to be listened to. And here is the part that should genuinely make you angry. The thermal principles Marcus applied are not secret, they are not advanced, they are taught in introductory building science courses. The concept of a dead air space as an insulator has been understood since the 19th century. The thermal bridge problem, the way cold conducts through unbroken materials from outside to inside, is in every construction manual ever written. The knowledge existed. The system simply decided it did not need to apply it to solutions built for people it had already written off. This is not Marcus Webb's failure. Marcus Webb was not broken. He was not ignorant. He was not making do with inferior understanding. He was applying real principles with real materials in a real environment. The failure belongs entirely to a system that built solutions around optics and budget cycles, deployed them at people who had no alternative, and then quietly accepted the 700 per year death toll as an administrative reality rather than an engineering problem with an engineering solution. Let's get into the specific mechanics of what Marcus built, because this is where the story stops being tragic and starts being extraordinary, and because the principles here apply far beyond one man and one winter. Layer 1, the walls. A standard wooden shipping pallet is 48 by 40 inches, built from kiln-dried softwood, typically southern yellow pine or Douglas fir, with boards roughly 3/4 of an inch thick. Raw softwood carries an R value of about 1.25 per inch. That 3/4 inch board gives you approximately R 0.94, which by itself is nearly worthless. A single pallet wall would not meaningfully insulate a garden shed. Marcus knew this instinctively, even without the numbers. So he did not build single walls. He built double walls, 2 pallets thick, with a deliberate 4-inch gap between them. And that gap is where the engineering happened. Dead air, trapped and completely still, is one of the most powerful insulators known to physics. Think about a thermos. A thermos does not generate heat. It has no power source. What it does is create a vacuum, essentially a perfect dead air space between its inner and outer walls, and that gap alone keeps coffee hot for 6 hours. Marcus did not have a vacuum, but he had something close enough. That 4-inch air gap between his double walls contributed roughly R 1.0 on its own. Then he filled the gap. He packed it floor to ceiling with flattened cardboard boxes sourced from a grocery store dumpster. Cardboard is a cellular material, its corrugated structure full of tiny trapped air pockets. It carries an R value of approximately 3.5 per inch. 4 inches of packed cardboard brought him roughly R14. That is the same insulation rating as a standard American residential wall, built with fiberglass batt insulation and code-compliant framing. A man with $0 built a wall that matched a code-compliant house using pallets and grocery store garbage. Let that land. Layer 2, the floor. This is where the institutional shelter system fails most catastrophically and most invisibly. Concrete and frozen ground are thermal sinks. They extract heat from a human body with patient, relentless efficiency across an entire night. A sleeping bag rated to 32 degrees loses most of its insulation value the moment you lay it on a hard surface, because insulation works by trapping air inside its material. Compress that material between your body weight and a rigid floor, and the loft collapses, the air escapes, and the rating collapses with it. Marcus had experienced this directly. 2 winters of waking up colder than when he lay down, his body heat spent warming the ground rather than warming himself. His floor assembly addressed this with layered logic. First, pallets laid flat, creating an air gap between the frozen earth below and everything above. Then 2 layers of flattened cardboard, then a sheet of thick plastic salvaged from a construction site, functioning as a vapor barrier, blocking moisture from migrating upward from the ground into his sleeping surface. Then foam scraps, stacked and compressed into a pad. The ground beneath him was frozen at 15 degrees. The air inside his floor assembly, 6 inches above that ground, was not. He had broken the thermal bridge, that continuous conductive pathway that cold travels when there is no interruption between outside and inside. Architects spend thousands of dollars engineering thermal bridge breaks into high-performance buildings. Marcus built one from a dumpster haul. Layer 3, the roof. Most improvised shelters either go flat, which accumulates snow load until the structure collapses, or go so steep that they become wind sails. Marcus cut notches into 2 end pallets and propped the roof pallets at roughly 15 degrees. Not dramatic, but enough. That pitch shed snow and water continuously, rather than letting it accumulate. But the more important effect was thermal. Warm air rises. At 15 degrees of pitch, the interior air column naturally stratified. The warmest air collected at the roof peak, creating a thermal buffer zone of warm air between the cold roof surface and Marcus's sleeping space below. Marcus had a more direct description. He called it keeping the cold off his face. Layer 4, the ceiling and orientation. He spent one entire day, day 9 of 11, doing nothing but moving around the exterior of the structure, with his hand pressed flat against every joint, every corner, every edge, feeling for the thin, cold breath of air infiltration. Every gap he found, he sealed. Strips of plastic bag material pressed into cracks. One partial can of spray foam from a contractor's discard pile, rationed with the precision of someone who knows they have one shot. The door, a triple-layered moving blanket hung from nails and weighted at the bottom with a piece of scavenged rebar so wind could not lift its hem and enter below. And the orientation. He had spent 2 weeks before the first wall went up watching the trees, the leaves, the snow patterns, the shadow lines. He knew exactly which direction the prevailing wind came from, northwest, off Lake Michigan, carrying the polar air that kills. He positioned his door on the southeast face. The wind hit his back wall first, the most heavily insulated surface, and broke across the structure's sides rather than driving directly into his entry. He read the landscape the way a ship captain reads a coastline before bringing a vessel into an unfamiliar harbor. Every decision was deliberate. Every decision was physics. So why has no warming center in America figured this out? Why, with all the engineering talent and institutional funding and decades of deployed solutions, is the system still putting people on gymnasium cots while a man with nothing solved the core thermal problem with dumpster materials? 3 reasons, and they always come back to the same 3. Speed. The institutional shelter system operates on emergency timelines measured in hours, not days. A warming center has to be operational tonight, not in 11 days. The flexibility to spend 2 weeks reading the wind, to iterate a design, to think carefully about dead air spaces and thermal bridges, the system has convinced itself it cannot afford that time. So it grabs the fastest deployable solution, which is almost always the worst thermal solution. And then it deploys that fast, bad solution year after year, because changing requires admitting the original design was wrong. Cost. A cot and a sleeping bag have SKUs. They can be purchased, inventoried, insured, and depreciated. A pallet structure built from salvaged materials has no purchase order number. It cannot move through a procurement system. It cannot be approved by a committee that has never slept outside. Even when the salvage structure dramatically outperforms the purchased equipment, it is invisible to the system because the system can only measure what it spent money on. Performance does not get counted. Only expenditure does. Liability. The moment an institution endorses a shelter design, it owns every outcome of that design. A person building their own structure assumes their own risk. A city agency that directs residents to build pallet shelters assumes the liability for every outcome. So the agency deploys the cots instead. The cots fail quietly. And because no one ever promised the cots would perform beyond minimum thresholds, no one is accountable for the distance between that threshold and actual survival. Marcus had none of that protection. His structure had no institutional endorsement. It simply had to work. And on January 30th, 2019, when the polar vortex hit Chicago and temperatures fell to 23 below zero, with wind chills at -50, cold enough to cause frostbite in under 10 minutes, cold enough that the Chicago River was steaming and fire hydrants were frozen solid, it worked. The interior temperature of Marcus Webb's pallet shelter, measured the next morning with a dollar store thermometer taped to the center wall, read 38 degrees Fahrenheit, a 61-degree differential, maintained through the night, with no heat source except one candle burned for 2 hours and the warmth of a single human body. His body was the furnace. His walls were the thermos. The physics did not care about his income. Here is where this becomes directly useful to you, because this video is not a tribute, it is a transfer of knowledge. Start with the floor tonight if it ever comes to it. The floor is where you lose the most heat and where people pay the least attention. Elevate yourself off any cold surface by even 2 inches, and your heat retention changes measurably. A layer of cardboard between you and the floor performs better than most people expect because of trapped air pockets in the corrugated structure, then plastic to block moisture, then your sleeping material on top. Barrier, insulation, barrier. That sequence matters more than the specific materials. If you are ever building any temporary structure, a camp shelter, an emergency room, anything, do not build single thickness walls if you have the material to build double. The gap between 2 surfaces adds insulation that the wall material alone cannot deliver. Fill that gap with anything cellular, cardboard, crumpled newspaper, dry leaves, foam scraps. The cellular structure is what traps the air and seal every joint. Air infiltration, cold air entering through gaps, destroys insulation performance faster than any other single factor. Run your hand along every seam. Feel for the breath of cold. Seal what you find. And the one question that cuts through everything, before any shelter decision, any insulation upgrade, any winter preparation, ask where the heat is going, not where it is coming from, where it is leaving. Every gap is an answer. Every single layer wall is an answer. Every uninsulated floor is an answer. Find the exits, and the solution almost always turns out to be far simpler than anyone tried to sell you. Marcus Webb was not a victim who got lucky. He was not a primitive man who stumbled onto something. He was a builder, trained by 11 years of hands-on construction work, sharpened by necessity, applying principles of thermal physics that humanity has understood since the first person noticed that a cave held warmth better than open ground. He was an engineer who happened to have no money. And those have never been contradictions. The knowledge was never lost. It was decided by systems that profit from dependency, by institutions that manage problems rather than solve them, that certain people were not supposed to have it. We are here to undo that decision. This channel exists to excavate the practical intelligence that the modern world buried under complexity, credential checking, and the quiet assumption that wisdom requires wealth. Every week, we go looking for the methods that were dismissed, the solutions that were abandoned, the understanding that was decided to be too simple for serious people to take seriously. Subscribe and join us. And tell us in the comments what problem in your life has a solution that everyone around you said was too basic to actually work. We want to dig into it next.